The wind was not made of air on that world. It was a drifting shimmer of ionized particles, glowing faintly green under the fractured sky. Each gust carried the static memory of war, whispers from detonated orbitals, the echo of distant bombardments long ceased. Kalen Voss moved through the ruins slowly, the crunch of glass and bone beneath his boots lost beneath the hum of radiation. The old scanners at his wrist flickered uncertainly, stuttering as if afraid of what they might detect. He had wandered through the corpses of civilizations before, but something about this one made him move more carefully, as though the silence itself might shatter. He stopped beside what had once been a habitation dome, its transparent shell melted into warped ribbons. The ground was littered with pale crystalline shards, each still pulsing with residual energy. They had once been alive, Elindran bioarchitecture, designed to grow, breathe, and think. Now it was all static. He crouched, brushing ash away from a broken support strut. His hand came away black with soot, and beneath it, the faint imprint of a palm, too small to have belonged to an adult. He frowned, eyes narrowing against the glare of a nearby fire pit that still burned without fuel, a phantom flame. The scanners pulsed once, then emitted a weak tone. Life detected. He stood instantly, pulse quickening. There should have been no survivors. The atmosphere was toxic to human lungs and only barely tolerable through his filtered mask. He followed the signal through the narrow remains of a corridor, where strange glyphs were burned into the walls, glowing faintly blue as he passed, a defense mechanism still operating on instinct. The corridor opened into a chamber whose ceiling had collapsed, a sharp beam of sunlight filtering through dust motes that spiraled like microscopic stars. That was where he saw her. She sat motionless beside the body of a woman, her small hands resting upon the still chest as if waiting for it to rise again. The woman's skin shimmered like molten glass, fractured by cracks that glowed dimly from within. Her eyes were open, but empty, frozen at the moment of some unseen agony. The child turned her head slowly, her gaze locking onto Kalen. Her eyes were pools of shifting starlight, galaxies reflected where pupils should have been. He had seen many alien species in his years beyond the core, but never anything that looked quite like her. For a long time, neither moved. The air between them seemed charged, vibrating faintly. Then she made a sound, not a cry, but a tone, a harmonic note so pure that his translator chip sparked in confusion. It was music, not language. A plea wrapped in melody. Kalen knelt slowly, lowering his weapon. "It's all right," he said, though his voice sounded useless here, small against the immensity of loss. "I'm not here to hurt you." The child tilted her head. The tone shifted, becoming softer, uncertain. She seemed to study him not with fear but with a strange, deliberate curiosity, as though measuring his intent through the rhythm of his breathing. He had seen that look once before, in the mirror of a warship's cockpit, when he realized he was the only one left alive. He reached into his pack, pulling out a ration bar. It felt ridiculous, offering something so mundane in a place so alien. But when he held it out, she looked at it for a long moment, then reached forward with trembling fingers. Her skin was cool and faintly luminous, her touch leaving faint trails of light against his glove. The moment she took the food, something shifted in the chamber. The lights embedded in the walls flared weakly, like old memories trying to awaken. The scanners at his wrist began beeping rapidly, energy surges, power sources flickering to life. It was as if the dead city had recognized her. Kalen glanced around uneasily. "We can't stay here," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Whoever did this might come back." He crouched beside the woman's body, brushing dust from the delicate crystalline armor still wrapped around her. In her hand, he found a small metallic shard etched with patterns that pulsed faintly when touched, a sigil, ancient and intricate. He didn't know its meaning, but he slipped it into his pocket. Then, without ceremony, he began digging a shallow grave in the powdered soil. The child watched silently, her wide eyes reflecting each movement like tiny mirrors. When he finally covered the last trace of the woman's form, the child stood and made a low, harmonic sound that vibrated through the air like a prayer. Kalen felt something twist inside him. He had seen too many graves, too many endings. He wanted to walk away, to mark the coordinates, leave them to the salvage drones, and disappear again into the void where no one expected anything of him. But he couldn't. The way she looked at him made it impossible. He lifted her carefully, surprised by how light she was, as if gravity itself hesitated to claim her. She rested her head against his shoulder without resistance. When he stepped outside, the alien wind brushed against his armor with a whispering hiss, carrying faint echoes of that harmonic song she had sung inside. Above them, the sky split into twin suns and 1,000 drifting fragments of what had once been orbital satellites. He stared up at them, remnants of some forgotten empire, and thought of how fragile civilizations were when measured against the patience of the stars. He tightened his grip on her and began walking toward the horizon where his ship waited, a dull gray shadow against the metallic dunes. The child stirred slightly, murmuring a sound that seemed to blend with the hum of the planet itself. "I'll get you off this world," he said quietly, not sure why he was promising it, not sure if he could. "You'll see the stars again." She made no reply, only placed her hand against his chest, where his heart beat beneath the armor. The light from her skin pulsed in time with it, slow, uncertain, alive. Behind them, the dead city began to fade into silence once more, but not entirely. Somewhere deep beneath the surface, systems reawakened. A pulse of light ran through buried circuits, transmitting a signal to the void, a single data string repeating endlessly into the cosmic dark. "She is found." Kalen moved through the cold expanse of space aboard the Solace Runner, its hull scarred from decades of drift and unrecorded skirmishes. The ship's engines hummed a low, steady note, the vibrations resonating through the deck like the heartbeat of some reluctant creature. Arya sat strapped into the passenger harness, her small hands tracing the patterns of the console lights without touching them, her eyes reflecting the infinite swirl of stars outside the viewport. It was quiet, except for the soft hum of life support systems, and yet the silence felt alive, charged with a fragile anticipation. She had eaten, and for the first time, she hummed again, a sound that rose and fell like a distant tide. Kalen watched, fascinated. It was not just noise, it was language, a subtle code of emotion that his translator could not yet parse. He leaned over, his voice low. "You'll have to teach me, you know. I don't understand yet, but I will." She tilted her head, a glimmer of a smile crossing her face as if she knew she already had. Navigation was the first challenge. The star maps in his database showed nothing, or rather, everything had been erased. The Alindra were ghosts in history, deliberately purged from records, their colonies erased from both human and alien charts. Kalen scrolled through the fragmented data, cross-referencing every anomaly he could find, scattered distress signals, abandoned outposts, and satellite wreckage that had survived orbital decay. Each lead felt like a step into a forgotten past, a path lined with traps and unrecorded dangers. He was searching for a species that the galaxy itself seemed intent on forgetting. A week into the journey, the first threat appeared. Sensors flickered violently as an unregistered vessel loomed from the darkness, moving faster than expected through the rift space. Kalen's hand rested on the throttle instinctively. "Hold on, Arya," he said, and the ship lurched as he maneuvered through the drifting debris of a shattered moon. Outside, fragments of rock and metal spun slowly, illuminated by distant starlight. Arya's hands flew to the straps as the ship twisted, but her eyes remained fixed on him, unafraid, as if she had known exactly what he would do next. The vessel followed them for 3 tense hours, then disengaged without a word, leaving behind only a faint trail of exotic ionized exhaust. Kalen frowned at the readings. Whoever they were, they had been tracking something unique, and that something was her. He tightened his grip on the controls and muttered, "You're more important than I thought, little one." Arya tilted her head and hummed in reply, a note of curiosity that matched the tension in his own chest. Days passed with slow routines. Kalen began teaching her the basics of the ship, how to recognize the control panels, the indicators of power surges, even how to watch the stars for orientation. She absorbed it all like a living sensor, her instincts uncanny. It was during these quiet hours that he noticed the subtle changes in her. She sometimes stared at the stars and whispered patterns that resonated with the ship's systems, causing lights to flicker or shields to adjust minutely. At first, he thought it coincidence, but when repeated, he realized it was more. She was interacting with the ship in ways that defied conventional physics, as if her presence altered reality slightly, bending the systems to respond to her. Kaylin also discovered fragments of memories surfacing when she slept. The hums she emitted became visions he could sense, images of cities built from crystal spires, bridges of light, and beings communicating through waves of color and sound. He began to understand that she carried more than herself. She carried the history of a civilization, encoded not in books or servers, but in her very mind. The weight of it pressed on him. If they were ever caught, the secrets she held could ignite wars, or worse, be obliterated completely. One day, while passing through the Veil Expanse, a region of dense nebular clouds where sensors failed and time behaved unpredictably, the ship's systems began to fluctuate violently. Alarms screamed as power cores shifted, warning lights flashing in erratic patterns. Arya sat in the center of the cabin, eyes closed, humming a tone that harmonized with the chaos around them. Kaylin barely had time to react as the ship lurched into a fold, emerging light years from their intended trajectory. The stars outside were unfamiliar, constellations rearranged as if rewritten by some cosmic hand. "What did you do?" he asked, breathless, looking at her. She opened her eyes and smiled faintly, the galaxy reflected in her iridescent gaze. It was not a trick, not a maneuver he could understand, it was guidance, intuition, or something older. Kaylin realized she was not just a passenger, she was the compass, the key, and perhaps the reason the universe itself had allowed him to find her. They encountered scattered debris from old wars, derelict stations orbiting dead suns, and AI remnants still following orders centuries old. Each stop offered fragments of information, cryptic records that confirmed what he had begun to suspect. The Alindra had been systematically erased from both memory and history, and any surviving member was a threat to the fragile balance of power that the Dominion sought to maintain. Yet Arya responded to each signal with subtle recognition, a tilt of the head, a harmonic note that seemed to awaken long-dormant systems. It was as if the universe whispered back to her, acknowledging her as more than just a survivor. At the end of the week, Kaylin finally allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He looked at her as she rested, hands glowing faintly against the console, eyes drifting closed. "I don't know if we'll ever find them," he murmured. "But I promise you, I will not stop looking. Even if it takes the edge of every galaxy, I will not stop." Arya stirred, letting out a soft, rising tone that sounded like agreement, or perhaps understanding. Somewhere deep in the dark, forgotten reaches of space, a signal pulsed faintly in response, a beacon hidden for centuries, waiting. And as the Solace Runner continued its slow, deliberate course through the war-scarred stars, Kaylin realized that their journey had only just begun. The child beside him was more than a survivor, she was a spark, a key, and perhaps, the last hope for a bond the galaxy had all but forgotten. The hum of the engines and the soft tones of her song merged into a single, quiet rhythm, the heartbeat of two travelers bound together by fate, loss, and a promise that neither fully understood, yet neither could break. Kaylin's ship hummed as it glided through the debris-strewn orbit of Calliope 9, a station built from scraps of forgotten starliners and the skeletons of orbital factories. The airlock hissed behind him as he stepped into the main concourse, holding Arya close. She clung to his arm like a living shadow, her eyes wide with wonder at the neon cascades and drifting holographic signs that flickered across the walls. The station was alive in a way the ruins of her world could never have been, chaotic, loud, and dangerous. "Stay close," he murmured, scanning the crowd. Traders, smugglers, and scavengers moved like schools of metallic fish, their cybernetic augmentations glinting under the artificial lights. Kaylin had been here before, years ago, when he scavenged old intelligence cores for credits. The place had not changed much, survival always demanded adaptation. He kept his free hand near the holster at his hip, though he hoped not to use it. Arya's small fingers brushed against the sigil tucked in his pocket, and he felt the faint pulse of energy, a reminder that she carried more than herself. They moved to a side corridor lined with black market stalls and hidden vendors. Kalen's target was Ree, a cybernetic linguist whose expertise bordered on illegal, a woman who could reconstruct erased languages and decrypt codes long thought lost. Ree had a reputation for being temperamental, brilliant, and unpredictable, exactly the sort of person Kalen needed to help understand the sigil on Arya's mother's body. The door to her workshop slid open with a hiss. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and old metal, and the walls were covered in holographic glyphs that pulsed and rotated slowly. Ree herself was a striking figure, half human, half machine, with lenses covering one eye that scanned constantly. She looked up as they entered. Kalen Voss, she said, her voice dry but carrying the faintest note of recognition. I thought you'd retired to drifting through dust fields and derelict warships. I had, he replied, lowering Arya slightly. But it seems I've picked up a companion who refuses to be ignored. Ree's gaze shifted to Arya. The child remained still, head tilted slightly, eyes observing every micro-movement of the workshop. Ree leaned forward, examining the sigil. Where did you find her? She asked, voice lowering. And don't tell me, just wandering through the debris. That won't cut it this time. Kalen explained carefully, leaving nothing out but framing it as discovery rather than rescue. Ree's lenses flickered rapidly as she analyzed the fragment, her mechanical fingers tracing the pulsing patterns. This is Elora, she whispered, almost reverently. One of the lost houses. Thought destroyed after the Orionic Purge. Where did you get this? Kalen hesitated, then placed his hand on his chest, letting the child's faint pulse resonate through him. From her mother, he said softly. And now she's all that's left. Ree's expression shifted, from curiosity to concern, then something sharper, almost fear. If she's alive, Kalen, then someone out there is hunting them. Not just for survival, but because she represents power. You've stumbled into a galaxy-wide purge, whether you knew it or not. Before he could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. Holographic projectiles scrolled across the displays, unauthorized drones had entered the sector, tracking an unregistered genetic signal. Kalen's stomach sank. They were not safe here, not even in a place designed for lawlessness. He grabbed Arya, pulling her toward the service tunnels. Ree followed, attaching a small device to her arm. If you make it out of here, send me a signal, she said. I can track them. And you'll need me later. The tunnels were narrow and dark, lined with pipes and conduits that thrummed with power. The drones moved swiftly, mechanical eyes scanning for life forms, their motion almost predatory. Kalen ducked around corners, hugging Arya close. She hummed softly, her tone blending with the vibration of the tunnels. For a brief moment, the drones faltered, their sensors unable to interpret the harmonic resonance. You're not just a child, he muttered, running. You're a weapon. Arya's tone shifted, rising and falling in a way that seemed almost playful, and he realized she was responding to him, acknowledging the danger, even shaping the space around them in ways he could not yet understand. They emerged into a service hatch leading to an emergency launch bay. Kalen engaged the small shuttle docked there, praying the power was still stable. As they lifted off, the drones gave chase, their weapons spitting pulses of energy that sizzled through the artificial sky. Kalen weaved through abandoned orbitals, narrowly avoiding collisions. Arya leaned forward, touching the console instinctively, her presence causing shields to fluctuate in ways that gave them just enough margin to escape. He realized, with both awe and fear, that she was guiding him, her innate connection with technology and the universe allowing them to survive where pure skill could not. When they finally broke free into deep space, Kalen exhaled, collapsing against the controls. Arya sat beside him, humming quietly. The nebulae of the Veil expanse stretched before them, a swirling maze of gas, light, and folded reality. For a moment, they were safe, at least until the galaxy remembered they existed. Kalen studied her then, the tiny survivor who had changed everything. "We'll need allies," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "And I know where to find one. But first, we need to understand what you carry inside you." Arya tilted her head, letting out a soft harmonic tone, a sound that made the ship itself vibrate faintly. It was not a word, not yet. But in that tone was promise, a connection, a beginning, and the unspoken knowledge that their journey was only getting started. The Solace runner surged forward, into the unknown dark, carrying the child who was more than a survivor and the man who had promised to keep her alive, together threading through a galaxy that had almost forgotten kindness. Kalen's ship hummed as it glided through the debris-strewn orbit of Calliope 9, a station built from scraps of forgotten starliners and the skeletons of orbital factories. The airlock hissed behind him as he stepped into the main concourse, holding Arya close. She clung to his arm like a living shadow, her eyes wide with wonder at the neon cascades and drifting holographic signs that flickered across the walls. The station was alive in a way the ruins of her world could never have been, chaotic, loud, and dangerous. "Stay close," he murmured, scanning the crowd. Traders, smugglers, and scavengers moved like schools of metallic fish, their cybernetic augmentations glinting under the artificial lights. Kalen had been here before, years ago, when he scavenged old intelligence cores for credits. The place had not changed much, survival always demanded adaptation. He kept his free hand near the holster at his hip, though he hoped not to use it. Arya's small fingers brushed against the sigil tucked in his pocket, and he felt the faint pulse of energy, a reminder that she carried more than herself. They moved to a side corridor lined with black market stalls and hidden vendors. Kalen's target was Ree, a cybernetic linguist whose expertise bordered on illegal, a woman who could reconstruct erased languages and decrypt codes long thought lost. Ree had a reputation for being temperamental, brilliant, and unpredictable, exactly the sort of person Kalen needed to help understand the sigil on Arya's mother's body. The door to her workshop slid open with a hiss. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and old metal, and the walls were covered in holographic glyphs that pulsed and rotated slowly. Ree herself was a striking figure, half human, half machine, with lenses covering one eye that scanned constantly. She looked up as they entered. "Kalen Voss," she said, her voice dry but carrying the faintest note of recognition. "I thought you'd retired to drifting through dust fields and derelict warships." "I had," he replied, lowering Arya slightly. "But it seems I've picked up a companion who refuses to be ignored." Ree's gaze shifted to Arya. The child remained still, head tilted slightly, eyes observing every micro-movement of the workshop. Ree leaned forward, examining the sigil. "Where did you find her?" she asked, voice lowering. "And don't tell me, just wandering through the debris. That won't cut it this time." Kalen explained carefully, leaving nothing out but framing it as discovery rather than rescue. Ree's lenses flickered rapidly as she analyzed the fragment, her mechanical fingers tracing the pulsing patterns. "This is Elora," she whispered, almost reverently. "One of the lost houses. Thought destroyed after the Orionic Purge. Where did you get this?" Kalen hesitated, then placed his hand on his chest, letting the child's faint pulse resonate through him. "From her mother," he said softly. "And now she's all that's left." Ree's expression shifted, from curiosity to concern, then something sharper, almost fear. "If she's alive, Kalen, then someone out there is hunting them. Not just for survival, but because she represents power. You've stumbled into a galaxy-wide purge, whether you knew it or not." Before he could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. Holographic projectiles scrolled across the displays, unauthorized drones had entered the sector, tracking an unregistered genetic signal. Kalen's stomach sank. They were not safe here, not even in a place designed for lawlessness. He grabbed Arya, pulling her toward the service tunnels. Ree followed, attaching a small device to her arm. If you make it out of here, send me a signal, she said. I can track them. And you'll need me later. The tunnels were narrow and dark, lined with pipes and conduits that thrummed with power. The drones moved swiftly, mechanical eyes scanning for life forms, their motion almost predatory. Kaylin ducked around corners, hugging Arya close. She hummed softly, her tone blending with the vibration of the tunnels. For a brief moment, the drones faltered, their sensors unable to interpret the harmonic resonance. You're not just a child, he muttered, running. You're a weapon. Arya's tone shifted, rising and falling in a way that seemed almost playful, and he realized she was responding to him, acknowledging the danger, even shaping the space around them in ways he could not yet understand. They emerged into a service hatch leading to an emergency launch bay. Kaylin engaged the small shuttle docked there, praying the power was still stable. As they lifted off, the drones gave chase, their weapons spitting pulses of energy that sizzled through the artificial sky. Kaylin weaved through abandoned orbitals, narrowly avoiding collisions. Arya leaned forward, touching the console instinctively, her presence causing shields to fluctuate in ways that gave them just enough margin to escape. He realized, with both awe and fear, that she was guiding him, her innate connection with technology and the universe allowing them to survive where pure skill could not. When they finally broke free into deep space, Kaylin exhaled, collapsing against the controls. Arya sat beside him, humming quietly. The nebulae of the Veil expanse stretched before them, a swirling maze of gas, light, and folded reality. For a moment, they were safe, at least until the galaxy remembered they existed. Kaylin studied her then, the tiny survivor who had changed everything. We'll need allies, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. And I know where to find one. But first, we need to understand what you carry inside you. Arya tilted her head, letting out a soft harmonic tone, a sound that made the ship itself vibrate faintly. It was not a word, not yet. But in that tone was promise. A connection, a beginning, and the unspoken knowledge that their journey was only getting started. The Solace runner surged forward, into the unknown dark, carrying the child who was more than a survivor and the man who had promised to keep her alive, together threading through a galaxy that had almost forgotten kindness. The Veil expanse stretched before them like a living tapestry, clouds of luminous gas swirling around colossal shards of rock and drifting satellites long abandoned. Kaylin gripped the controls of the Solace runner, eyes fixed on the shifting patterns outside, every sensor in the ship flickering as if struggling to interpret the chaotic density of space. Arya sat cross-legged on the deck, her small fingers brushing against the console, emitting low tones that harmonized with the ship's systems. The air thrummed around them with the resonance of her presence, and Kaylin realized, not for the first time, that she was more than a passenger, she was the navigator, the key, perhaps even the guardian of some path he could not yet comprehend. He leaned back in his chair for a moment, exhaling a sharp breath, allowing himself to think. For days, they had traversed these nebular labyrinths, chasing fragmented signals, scanning derelict stations, and avoiding Dominion patrols that seemed to sense their presence through methods beyond mere technology. The child beside him hummed softly, the notes coiling around the ship's engines and flickering systems, almost as if she were coaxing them along. During one of the longer stretches of silence, Arya's humming shifted, the tones sharp and insistent. Kaylin paused, hand hovering over the throttle. The stars outside blurred, their positions folding in ways that made the charts useless. Then, a strange sensation passed over him, images, not memories of his own, but flashes of crystalline towers, bridges of liquid light, and beings moving in synchrony through cities that defied gravity. He blinked rapidly, trying to shake the visions, but they persisted, accompanying the rising pitch of her song. "Are you showing me something?" he asked cautiously. Arya tilted her head, her eyes reflecting the stars beyond the viewport. A faint pulse emanated from her skin, almost like the beat of a drum, though it was not sound but vibration felt through the ship's hull. Kaylin realized she was projecting, not consciously, but instinctively, fragments of memory, or perhaps maps encoded in her very being. He studied the displays. The sensors were behaving erratically, detecting distortions in gravity, fluctuations in time, and residual energy signatures unlike anything recorded in the core charts. Something about this space was alive, responsive, and somehow aware of her presence. The realization unsettled him. If Arya could interact with the universe in this way, it meant she was more than an orphan survivor. She was a force, a living conduit to the lost knowledge of a civilization that had once bent the stars themselves to their will. Hours passed as the Solace Runner navigated the twisting currents of the nebula. Kalen kept a cautious eye on the displays, guiding them through channels that shifted unpredictably, relying as much on instinct as on technology. Arya continued her hums, subtle shifts in tone nudging the ship around obstacles that the scanners could not perceive. At one point, they passed a massive floating ruin, the skeleton of a satellite or orbital defense platform, its surface etched with alien script. She leaned forward, pressing her hand against the hull, and a faint glow traveled from her fingers into the metal. The lights of the structure flickered, as if awakening from centuries of slumber, and for a brief moment, it seemed to respond to her presence, realigning floating debris in a way that opened a clear path forward. Kalen's jaw tightened. "You're not just surviving," he said softly. "You're alive in a way I don't understand." She hummed back, a long, rising note that vibrated in the air and seemed to resonate in his chest. That night, in the false gravity of the ship's cabin, he watched her sleep. Her breaths were measured, rhythmic, each exhale accompanied by a faint shimmer of light along her skin. He wondered how much of her people's knowledge was stored here, in these fragile, shimmering strands of memory, and how much the galaxy would kill to possess if they ever discovered her. He felt the weight of responsibility settle deep in his bones. Keeping her alive was no longer just about survival, it was about protecting the legacy of an entire civilization. A sudden jolt shook the ship. Alarms flared, warning lights spinning across the deck. Kalen's hands moved instinctively, stabilizing the ship as sensors detected a fold in the space-time continuum ahead. Through the viewport, the nebula rippled unnaturally, currents of energy bending as though some invisible hand manipulated them. Arya stirred, her hands rising to touch the console. The harmonic pulses emanating from her intensified, stabilizing the Solace Runner against the distortions. Kalen realized she wasn't just reacting, she was communicating with the fabric of space, guiding them safely through a path that existed only because she recognized it. When the turbulence subsided, they emerged into a quiet sector, stars arranged in constellations unknown, orbiting suns with spectra he had never catalogued. He exhaled, leaning back. "We're far from anything we know," he murmured, voice barely audible over the faint hum of the engines. Arya looked up at him, eyes shining with that unspoken knowledge, and hummed a tone that was both comforting and strange, resonating with a feeling he couldn't name. Kalen studied her, understanding more fully than ever that their journey had become a delicate navigation of more than space. It was a journey through memory, resonance, and the remnants of a civilization erased not by time but by fear. And somewhere, deep in the folds of the nebulae, a signal pulsed faintly, a beacon that had been waiting for centuries for the one who could finally awaken it. He adjusted the course, the Solace Runner threading carefully through the clouds of luminescent gas. Beside him, Arya hummed again, the notes weaving around the ship, around him, into the vast unknown, carrying the promise of discovery, of danger, and of a legacy that refused to die. In the quiet aftermath, Kalen knew with certainty that she was not just the child of a fallen world. She was its living echo, and together they would chase the threads of history, across star systems where memory and reality intertwined, until they found the remnants of her people, or were consumed by the darkness of a galaxy determined to forget. The twin suns of Elindra Prime hung low over the horizon, casting long, fractured shadows across the misted valleys. Kalen guided the Solace Runner through the planet's upper atmosphere, the ship buffeted by thermal currents that twisted unpredictably through the dense clouds. Below, faint glimmers of crystalline structures poked through the fog, remnants of cities thought lost to time, their spires fractured but still resonant with latent energy. Arya sat beside him, her small hands hovering over the console, her eyes reflecting the faint, otherworldly light below. She hummed softly, the vibration synchronizing with the hum of the ship, almost as if the world itself responded to her presence. As they descended, Kalen could see more clearly the ruins of Alindran architecture, bridges of refractive material stretching between towers, delicate lattices of energy suspended in midair. The planet was alive in a quiet, patient way, holding on to its history despite centuries of neglect. "We're close," he said, his voice low. "Are you ready for this?" Arya tilted her head, emitting a harmonic note that seemed to answer without words. The landing zone was an old central plaza, now overgrown with luminescent fungi and delicate energy vines that pulsed faintly, responding to the child's presence. Kalen set the ship down carefully, the hull scraping lightly against the uneven terrain. He cut the engines and held his breath as the silence of the planet surrounded them, broken only by the faint hum of Arya's resonance. They stepped out into the mist. Kalen could feel the latent energy in the ground, the echo of Alindran power systems that had survived centuries underground. Arya led, her steps light and deliberate, as if she remembered the pathways her people once walked. Kalen followed closely, scanning the environment for threats, but there was none. Only the whispers of the past, carried in the wind and in the crystalline structures that shimmered faintly in the fog. They entered a hollowed tower, its interior a mixture of crystalline corridors and faded light conduits. Holographic patterns flickered weakly, responding to Arya's approach. She reached out, touching the walls, and they brightened in resonance, illuminating the ancient symbols etched into the structure. Kalen watched in awe as she moved through the halls with a grace that belied her years, each step seeming to awaken something long dormant. At the center of the tower, they found a chamber sealed by intricate energy locks, flickering in response to Arya's presence. She pressed her small hand against the barrier, and a pulse of light ran through the symbols, unlocking the mechanism with a soft, musical tone. The doors opened, revealing a subterranean sanctum. Inside, figures stirred, the surviving Alindra, hidden beneath protective cloaks of energy, their eyes wide with disbelief at the sight of the child. Arya stepped forward, her presence commanding and serene. The elders of the Enclave recognized her immediately. She was the heir of Elora, the living embodiment of hope they had believed lost forever. Kalen felt a mixture of relief and tension. They had found her people, but the atmosphere was taut with wariness. The Alindra were not all welcoming, centuries of betrayal and fear had left scars. One elder, her skin faintly glowing with the light of deep crystals embedded beneath, stepped forward. "She is the child," the elder whispered, voice trembling with recognition. "The last of our house, preserved by the stars themselves." Before Kalen could respond, a sudden tremor shook the ground. Alarms, long dormant, blared within the sanctum as sensors activated automatically. The Dominion fleet, tracking the residual genetic and psychic signature of Arya, had arrived in orbit above the planet. Kalen's stomach twisted as he looked at the sky through the crystal canopy. The massive ships loomed, their energy weapons locked and systems scanning. They had been followed, and the sanctuary that had remained hidden for centuries was now at risk. Arya stepped forward, undaunted. Her voice, a series of harmonic tones, reverberated through the chamber, interacting with the latent energy of the planet itself. The lights of the sanctum brightened, shields flickering into partial existence, protective fields responding to her resonance. The elders watched, awestruck, as the child's presence seemed to bend the very energy of Alindra Prime, preparing defenses they had thought impossible. Kalen adjusted his weapon, moving beside her. "They won't stop," he murmured, watching the massive fleet above. "But we'll give them something they can't calculate." The first wave of Dominion drones descended, streaks of light cutting through the mist outside. Arya's song rose in intensity, vibrations matching the harmonic frequencies of the planet's dormant systems. The crystalline structures along the walls hummed in response, sending resonant pulses outward. Shields flared across the tower's perimeter, kinetic and energy weapons deflected, systems overloaded with harmonic interference. For a moment, the impossible became real. Arya's presence turned defense into an art, bending technology with a force that was more than physical. Kalen watched her, awe and fear twisting together. He realized, fully, that she carried not only her people's memory but also the power to change the course of the conflict before them. The Dominion would not simply retreat, they would escalate. Yet as he stood beside her, he also felt a fragile hope. The child, the last of a lost lineage, was the spark that could rekindle the galaxy's forgotten alliances, if she survived. The mist shifted, reflecting the pulsing light of the sanctuary as Arya extended her hands, sending a harmonic wave outward. The Dominion fleet above faltered, their targeting system scrambling against an unknown resonance. Kalen understood, with a cold clarity, that this was just the beginning. The survival of her people, and perhaps the fate of the galaxy, depended on them navigating the fragile balance between power, mercy, and the echoes of a civilization that refused to die. He glanced at Arya, her eyes shining with unspoken certainty, and whispered, "We've made it this far, now we fight for more than survival. We fight for home." The sky above Elindra Prime burned with the cold light of 100 Dominion warships. Their orbits shimmered with the hum of energy shields and thrumming engines, a mechanical chorus of inevitability. Kalen stood beside Arya at the center of the sanctuary, the crystalline spires around them thrumming softly in response to her presence. The elders watched in silence, their faces etched with fear, awe, and hope. Every system in the subterranean city was alive with latent energy, waiting for her to awaken it. She hummed, long and low, a note that reverberated through the walls, up into the air, out toward the waiting fleet. "They've come for her," one elder whispered, voice trembling. All of them, drawn by her existence. Kalen nodded, tightening his grip on the modified pulse rifle he carried. "And we're going to show them why she cannot be taken." The Dominion opened fire first, beams of energy slicing through the fog and clouds, striking the planetary shields that had been dormant for centuries. Crystalline structures flared, sending refracted light in every direction, blinding sensors and disorienting drones. The Elders' warning systems flickered, overwhelmed by harmonic feedback as Arya's song intensified, intertwining with the planet's natural resonance. The Dominion ships shook, their targeting arrays disrupted by frequencies they could not calculate. Kalen fired in short, precise bursts, disabling drones that had breached the lower orbital layers. Each shot was deliberate, the hum of Arya's song infused the weapon's energy, causing them to ripple with resonance that disoriented the machines further. He glanced at her, eyes wide with wonder, and saw her small frame glowing faintly, pulsing in time with the harmonic waves emanating from the sanctum. It was more than defense. It was a message, not of aggression, but of survival, of existence that could not be erased. The Dominion fleet faltered as Arya's resonance reached its peak, linking their sensors, their communications, even the minds of certain AI units, in a momentary feedback loop that confused, stalled, and disarmed them. In that instant, for the first time in decades, they understood. Not fully, not consciously, but enough, that the Elindra were not extinct, and that their power was not to be trifled with. Kalen moved to the main console, his fingers flying over controls connected to the sanctuary's defensive matrix. He coordinated with Arya, synchronizing pulses and harmonic resonance waves, each signal a precise note in a symphony of survival. Slowly, carefully, they turned a potential massacre into a standoff. The Dominion fleet paused, sensors overwhelmed, systems struggling to respond to something beyond comprehension. Then Arya did something Kalen had not expected. She stepped forward, her voice, no longer just humming, became a melody, layered and intricate, a song of memory and plea, of history encoded in sound. The elders began to chant with her, their voices blending with hers, linking the resonance of the sanctuary to the very core of the planet. Crystalline spires lit in succession, sending waves of energy skyward, weaving a protective lattice over the city and scattering the Dominion drones like sparks in a storm. Kalen exhaled, realizing that what they had achieved was not a simple defense. They had created a bridge, a connection, between all parties, a temporary truce enforced not by diplomacy but by the sheer weight of recognition, empathy, and harmonic truth. In that suspended moment, soldiers, AI, and observers alike felt the weight of the centuries of loss, the longing of a civilization thought dead, and the unspoken plea for mercy that resonated through Aria's song. The Dominion commander, observing the unfolding spectacle, hesitated. Calculations failed. Orders faltered. It was not surrender, it was comprehension. For the first time, the galaxy glimpsed a power rooted not in conquest, but in the endurance of life, memory, and kindness. When the last waves of energy subsided, silence fell, broken only by the faint hum of the sanctum. Kalen lowered himself to one knee, looking at Arya. She had done more than survive. She had turned history itself, even briefly, towards something fragile and new. The elders approached, surrounding the child, their faces illuminated with pride and reverence. One elder placed a hand on Kalen's shoulder. "You brought her home," the elder said quietly. "And through her, we live again." Kalen's heart ached with relief, exhaustion, and wonder. He glanced at Arya, who looked back at him with those starlit eyes, the light in them soft, calm, and full of quiet understanding. She reached up, brushing her hand against his chest, where he felt the steady thrum of his own heart. Outside, the Dominion fleet retreated, leaving the system in uneasy stillness. The standoff had ended, not with destruction, but with recognition, an understanding that some forces were not to be measured in firepower alone. Elindra Prime remained, its people alive, their secrets safe for now, their home reborn under the twin suns and the vigilant song of the child who had survived against all odds. Kalen stepped outside the sanctuary for the first time, breathing in the strange, sweet air of the planet, thick with mist and charged with energy. Arya followed, small beside him, humming a soft, rising note that seemed to harmonize with the wind and the faint glow of the crystalline towers. "You did it," he murmured. "You brought them back. You did everything." She tilted her head, a gentle, musical note flowing from her lips, not words, but an understanding. And in that sound, he heard hope. A civilization preserved. A galaxy reminded that kindness, mercy, and courage could ripple across the void, shaping fate itself. Kalen realized he no longer felt like a wanderer. He had found purpose in a child, in a people thought lost, in a promise kept across star systems. Elindra Prime was alive again, and so too was the spark of connection that the galaxy had nearly forgotten. He looked up at the twin suns setting beyond the horizon, Aria's hand in his. The stars stretched endlessly, but for the first time in a long time, Kalen felt the weight of eternity shift, not with fear, but with the quiet, resolute hope that some bonds, once made, could endure across any distance, through any darkness, and even across the cold, vast reaches of space. And with that, the Solace Runner rested beside the sanctuary, carrying with it the memory of their journey, the echoes of lost civilizations, and the certainty that a single act of mercy could illuminate even the farthest corners of the galaxy.